Ever feel like you're just stuck, like spinning your wheels? You're putting in the work day after day, but the results just aren't showing up. It's like you're diligently watering a seed, but all you get is dry dirt. No sprout in sight.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a few years back, I was training for a half marathon, religiously followed the plan, but my pace, it barely budged for weeks. I was ready to ditch the whole thing. Then a friend mentioned this book, Atomic Habits. It totally shifted my thinking. Turns out it's not about some magical overnight transformation. It's about these tiny changes, compounding over time. Just like, tiny drops of water can carve canyons over millennia. These seemingly insignificant daily actions that can lead to remarkable results. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. So this deep dive, we're going to unpack the key insights from Atomic Habits and how these principles can apply to different parts of life, right? One of the first things the book jumps into is this idea of the plateau of latent potential. Basically, it says we often get discouraged, right? Because we don't see immediate results. But think of water.
Yeah.
It doesn't visibly change until it hits 32 degrees and turns into ice.
Right.
Sometimes we need to keep putting in the work, even when we don't see progress,
Mm-hmm.
because that breakthrough, it could be just around the corner. And that really resonated with me, because with my half marathon training, I was so focused on hitting a specific time, like yesterday. I wasn't appreciating those small wins, like increasing my mileage each week or finishing a run without stopping. Those were wins. But I was so fixated on the end goal, I was missing the progress I was actually making. And that's where this shift comes in, from a goal-oriented mindset to a system-oriented mindset. James Clear, the author, he argues that goals are great for setting a direction, sure. But systems are what actually get us there. Because once you achieve a goal, then what? You need a system, right? Set of habits, routines that'll keep you moving forward, even after you've crossed that finish line. So how do we build these systems? Atomic Habits breaks down habit formation into 4 stages: cue, craving, response, and reward. It's like a loop, constantly running in our brains. Let's say you're trying to build a habit of reading before bed every night. The cue might be putting a book on your nightstand. Seeing that book, your trigger. The craving, that desire to relax, escape into a good story. The response, actually picking up the book, opening it, and starting to read. And the reward, well, it could be that feeling of relaxation, or just getting lost in another world, or, the satisfaction of finishing a good chapter. The key is understanding how this cycle works. So you can kind of manipulate it, right? Make the cue obvious, make the craving attractive, make the response easy, and make the reward satisfying. And that's where things get really interesting. Atomic Habits gives us a ton of practical strategies for doing just that. We'll dive into those next time. Okay, so we've been talking about making those cues obvious, right? Making the cravings attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying. But how do we, actually do that? Where do we even begin? Well, one strategy that James Clear talks about is habit stacking. Basically, it's like piggybacking a new habit onto one you already have. Let's say you already have a solid habit of, making your bed every morning. You could stack the habit of doing a quick 5-minute stretch right after. The act of making the bed becomes the cue for stretching. It's like building this chain reaction of good habits. Pretty cool, right? And then there's this concept of environment design. It's all about making your surroundings work for you, not against you. If you're trying to cut back on sugary drinks, don't keep soda in the fridge. Instead, stock it with sparkling water or herbal teas. Make those healthy choices more visible and easier to grab. Or say you want to read more, create a cozy reading nook, a little dedicated space where you can just curl up with a good book. It's all about removing those temptations and making good habits as easy as possible. Now, for those times when you're feeling resistant to a new habit, there's this awesome little hack called the 2-minute rule. The idea is to make the habit so ridiculously easy to start that you can't say no. So instead of saying, I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes, you say, I'm going to sit down and close my eyes for just 2 minutes. Or instead of, I'm going to write a whole chapter, it's, I'm going to open my laptop and write 1 sentence. The key is just to get started, because often that initial momentum is all you need to keep going. It's like pushing a snowball down a hill. Once it starts rolling, it just keeps gathering momentum, Now, Atomic Habits also digs into the power of habit tracking. It's like seeing your progress, right? It can be super motivating, whether you use a fancy app, a simple notebook, or just mark it on a calendar. Find what works for you. Seeing that visual evidence of your progress, it's a powerful reminder that all those small actions are adding up. They're creating real change. And speaking of seeing the bigger picture, one of the coolest insights from Atomic Habits is, well, it's about how our habits are reflections of our identity. Like we tend to act in alignment with the kind of person we believe we are, right? So if you want to change your habits, you got to start by, maybe changing those beliefs about yourself. Like if you see yourself as a healthy person, you're more likely to make choices that support that, right?
You'll prioritize exercise, healthy food, enough sleep. But if you see yourself as someone who's like just not a morning person, well, waking up early to work out, that's going to be a lot tougher. So the key is to start seeing yourself as the person who has those habits you want. And then, well, act in alignment with that. Fake it till you make it, as they say, because eventually those actions start to shape your beliefs. And those beliefs, they make those habits stick. Powerful stuff. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to leave you with one final thought before we move on, and that's about patience. Building lasting habits, it takes time. It's not a sprint. It's more like a marathon, There'll be days when you're motivated, you're crushing it, and there'll be days when you just want to, I don't know, eat a whole bag of chips on the couch. And that's totally okay. The key is to just keep showing up, even when you don't feel like it. Because those small, consistent actions, they're the ones that, compounded over time, lead to those remarkable results. Okay, so what we've been talking about, the plateau of latent potential.
And how sometimes we don't see the results right away. But what about when we start seeing those results? How do we keep that momentum going,
Yeah.
Well, James Clear, he talks about this idea of making our habits satisfying. It's like, why would we stick with something if it feels like a chore, right? He calls this reinforcement. Basically, reward yourself, but not like these huge, extravagant rewards, like buying a new car because you ate a salad. It's more about those small, everyday rewards. Like maybe you treat yourself to a fancy coffee after a good morning of work, or you let yourself watch that next episode of your favorite show after you finish a chapter of that book you've been meaning to read. It's about connecting those positive feelings with the things you want to be doing. It makes those good habits something you actually look forward to. And it's funny because when I was learning Italian, one of the things that really helped me stick with it was, well, I had to find ways to make it fun. So instead of just drilling verb conjugations over and over, I started watching Italian movies with subtitles.
Yeah.
And at first, I barely understood a word. But over time, I started picking things up, and it was so rewarding when I could finally follow the story, and get those jokes. It just made the whole process so much more enjoyable. And, that actually reminds me of another point James Clear makes. It's about focusing on the process, not just the outcome. It's so easy to get caught up in those, big goals. Those end results, like, I want to lose 10 pounds, or I want to write a book, or, I want to learn to play the guitar. But those outcomes, they're just the tip of the iceberg. The real magic. It happens in the day-to-day. In those small wins along the way, it's like, think about building a house. You don't just magically end up with a finished house, right? You got to lay the foundation, brick by brick, board by board. And it's a long process. Sometimes it feels slow. But each step, each brick you lay, each board, it brings you a little bit closer to that final goal. And the real satisfaction comes not just from having the finished house, but from that whole process of building it, seeing it all come together piece by piece. And building habits, that's kind of what it's all about too, right? It's about enjoying that journey, not just getting to the destination. It's about, finding those small wins in that daily practice, in that slow and steady progress. When I think about all this stuff, it just makes me realize how much power we actually have. We're not just stuck with the habits we've always had. We can choose to become the kind of person we want to be. And we can do it by, designing our habits, being intentional about those choices, and aligning those habits with what really matters to us. So what tiny change you're going to make today? What one small step can you take to move a little bit closer to the person you want to be?
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect. It's about progress. It's about showing up day after day and, making those small, consistent choices, the ones that add up over time. So that's it for our deep dive into atomic habits. Hope you found it as interesting as I did. And hey, remember, you got the power to make real changes. So go out there and make those atomic habits work for you.